Gaze upon a royal portrait. You are meant to see divinity made flesh, a sovereign ordained by God, their power etched in the very lines of their face, a testament to a pure and noble bloodline. This is the story they told the world. It was a masterpiece of deception, for the most powerful dynasty in Europe did not simply crumble under the weight of its own ambition. It rotted from within, its foundation poisoned by a single devastating obsession. The last king of this line was a living ghost. He could not chew, could not speak clearly, could not father a child. His own body was a prison, and the key had been thrown away generations before he was born. But before Charles II of Spain became a biological dead end, he was the heir to a global empire, the culmination of 2 centuries of calculated power. This is the terrifying, true story of a family that, in its quest for genetic purity, engineered its own destruction. Modern science has since peered into his DNA and found a genetic landscape so ravaged it defies belief. He was a genetic event horizon, a point of no return. What you are about to hear is a descent into a uniquely human-made hell, a tragedy written not in ink, but in blood. Let me transport you to a cold morning on November 6, 1661, deep within the stone walls of Madrid's Royal Alcazar. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and fear. The Queen has been delivered of a son, the long-awaited male heir. But the midwives do not rejoice. They stare in silent dread at the infant in their arms. His head is too large, his body listless. And history whispers a chilling detail. His mother, Queen Mariana, looked upon her firstborn son and felt not joy, but a visceral revulsion. She refused to nurse him. This was not a failure of love, but a primal recoil from something profoundly wrong. You see, Queen Mariana was not just this baby's mother. She was also his first cousin and his father's own niece. To unravel this family tree is an exercise in madness. It is less a tree and more a tangled, suffocating knot. But to comprehend how a child could be born so broken, we must journey back to the very beginning of this dark compact, to when the Habsburgs devised their infamous strategy. Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. A charming motto, until you realize the grim truth. They were marrying themselves. For generations, the Spanish Habsburgs turned their family into a closed circuit. Cousin wed cousin, uncle married niece, in a dizzying carousel of matrimony. They called it keeping the bloodline pure, a celestial blue blood untouched by common stock. Science now has a different term, a genetic catastrophe in slow motion. Consider this, for over 200 years, the Habsburgs practiced a level of inbreeding that would make a medieval village blush. By the time Charles II drew his first labored breath, his genetic inheritance was a house of cards built on a single, crumbling foundation. All 8 of his great-grandparents could trace their lineage back to one single couple, Juana the Mad and Philip the Fair. His family tree was not just narrow, it was a straight line folding in on itself. Geneticists have calculated his inbreeding coefficient, a measure of genetic redundancy, at a staggering 0.254. To understand that number is to understand doom. The child of a brother and sister has a coefficient of 0.25. Charles II was, genetically, more inbred than the product of incest. But numbers are sterile. They cannot capture the suffering of the child. From his first days, Charles was a collection of failures. He could not suckle properly. His jaw was already misaligned, a grotesque preview of the famous Habsburg jaw to come. His skull, misshapen and swollen, bore the marks of bones that refused to fuse. The wet nurses hired to sustain him noted a profound and unsettling lethargy. He did not cry, not out of contentment, but from a terrifying lack of vitality. He would lie still, a pale, oversized head lolling on a pillow, his breathing a faint rasp. The finest physicians in Spain were baffled. They were witnessing the collapse of a human form before their very eyes. As the years unspooled, the horror only deepened. At 4 years old, Charles could not walk. His legs, thin and bowed from rickets, were useless beneath him. He was carried through the palace corridors like a relic, the future king of a global empire rendered immobile, and he could not speak, not a word. His tongue was already too large for his malformed mouth. When sounds finally did come, they were wet, slurred, and unintelligible. Court chroniclers with diplomatic delicacy wrote that his speech required interpretation. Let me translate that for you. It meant his mouth could not contain his own tongue. His jaw jutted so far forward that his lips could never meet, and every attempted word was accompanied by a torrent of drool. Attendants stood by with linens, their sole duty to wipe the chin of their sovereign. The Habsburg jaw, if you have never seen it, imagine a skull where the lower face has been wrenched forward, a permanent skeletal sneer. It was a deformity that defined him. In his portraits, artists softened the blow, showing him with a slightly parted mouth as if in thoughtful pause. The reality was far more cruel. His mouth was always agape because it could not close. Foreign ambassadors, granted an audience, struggled to hide their shock. One wrote in a coded dispatch that the young king had the appearance of a man with 2 faces, and that to stand near him when he spoke was to be bespattered. And then the eating. Charles could not chew. His teeth, upper and lower, were separated by a chasm. Every meal was a humiliating ritual. Food had to be pureed, meat minced to a paste, bread soaked in broth until it dissolved. He swallowed everything whole, his prodigious stomach doing the work his jaw could not. But his physical torment was only one layer of the curse. His body was a fortress with no walls. Childhood diseases that others survived laid him low for months. Measles, chickenpox, rubella, each one scarred him, weakened him. A bout of smallpox left his face a battlefield of pox and lesions. Worse, it triggered a new affliction, hydrocephalus, water on the brain. The fluid built up inside his already massive skull, causing blinding headaches and seizures that would stalk him for the rest of his life. By 10, his mind was revealed to be as compromised as his body. Tutors found him sweet-natured, but utterly incapable of learning. Concepts explained one day were forgotten the next. He would stare into the middle distance for hours, lost in a fog no one could penetrate. One tutor's private notes lamented, "His Majesty tries with great effort, but retains nothing. He was a king who could not rule, a student who could not learn." Then came the final, most cruel betrayal. Puberty never arrived. His voice remained a high, reedy thread. His body remained hairless, his frame stunted. The court watched in silent panic, for the king had one paramount duty, to continue the line. At 18, he was married to the lovely Marie-Louise of Orléans. The wedding was a study in contrasts. She, radiant and graceful, he, shuffling, drooling, and ghastly. The marriage was never consummated. Charles was impotent, his reproductive system as malformed as the rest of him. For 10 years, the court subjected the couple to increasingly desperate remedies, potions of ground pearls, tonics of bull's blood, even the dried member of a stag. His own mother, in a fit of macabre desperation, had him sleep beside the exhumed corpses of saints, hoping their holiness could spark life in her son. It was a futile, ghoulish pantomime. Marie-Louise died young, heartbroken. Charles was married again, to Maria Anna of Neuburg, from a famously fertile family. The result was the same: no heir. The end was now inevitable. In his 30s, Charles was an old man. His hair fell out, his teeth rotted, his body was racked by seizures. He was called El Hechizado, the Bewitched. He believed it himself, submitting to exorcisms, clutching holy relics, weeping as he asked what sin he had committed to deserve such a life. He died in 1700 at 38. his body having endured 4 decades of unceasing failure. The autopsy was a final act of horror. The physicians found a heart shriveled to the size of a peppercorn, lungs corroded by infection, intestines gangrenous and rotten. They discovered he possessed only a single, atrophied, blackened testicle. His brain was largely fluid. It was a miracle he had lived at all. His death without an heir plunged Europe into the War of the Spanish Succession, shattering an empire. The Habsburg dynasty, which had sought to conquer the world through marriage, was ultimately conquered by its own genes. Charles II stands in history as a ghost at the feast, a permanent warning. In their mad pursuit of purity, the Habsburgs did not preserve a divine bloodline. They created a monster, and in doing so, authored their own extinction. So the next time you see a royal portrait, look closer. See past the gold leaf and the ermine. See the fragile, fallible human being beneath. For biology is the one true king, and its judgment is absolute.